Okay. I've done this a few times. Hopefully this is the last time, this last take. I just want to set up a film that I want to share for World Mental Health Day. Essentially, it's a conversation that I filmed earlier this year with someone who is on a journey through poor mental health, is and was. It's a very intimate conversation, and she shares willingly and openly, and for that I'm very grateful. The benefit of that is that now I get to share that conversation in the hope of creating a better understanding of poor mental health, to help those that may be experiencing this, and to also help others that will undoubtedly be supporting those with poor mental health. This conversation was filmed over about 3 to 4 hours, and this has been edited down to about 40 minutes, which is quite a long time in regards to the internet. But it's 40 minutes that I think are worth watching. The things that are said are worth listening to. So take a look and see for yourself. For any references that are made during this conversation, you can check out the links below. Thanks.
Shall I tell you a bit about kind of some of the stuff that makes me me, and that also led up to this sort of very clear moment of burnout?
Absolutely, please.
So for the last nearly 17 years, I've been the co-founder of Livity, Livity, and for many years it was incredibly joyful and a great big adventure, and lots of hard work, and often a battle. But that's being an entrepreneur, and that's being a business owner, is fighting that fight and leading people up the mountain, and then getting to the top of that one and leading them up the next mountain. And in 2016, I was leading everyone up a mountain, specifically around a social investment deal that we wanted to secure for the business, which would let us grow that impact and grow the business over the next few years. And a few months into the due diligence period, I developed a permanent headache, which I fondly called investment headache. I just put it down to working longer hours than usual on the deal. That turned into tinnitus, and I remember thinking to myself, when we close the deal, I'm going to really start looking after myself. I'm burning at both ends, and need to find a bit more balance. But this is really important, so let's get the deal done. And we closed the deal in August. And if you think back to 2016, just generally in the world, it was a little bit like the beginning of the world going mad. So there was an awful lot of pressure on the business, and we weren't hitting some fairly ambitious targets. I had quite a few people issues in the business that ordinarily I'm a pretty resilient person. You know, they were not fun, they were not pleasant, but that, you know, I would have got through. But these were really, you know, they were pretty toxic, and they were taking their toll in different ways. My husband's career was really taking off. He's an artist, so he was travelling a lot. My daughter was settling into her second year at secondary school, so there was a lot of to-ing and froing beyond the general day-to-day. And there were a bunch of other things. There were some physical health issues that I had. There was a really traumatic experience that I had on an aeroplane, I was a keynote speaker for the British Council in Tunisia and experienced on my flight to Tunisia an asylum seeker being deported from the country, and it was a totally terrifying and really complex event that happened on the plane. Like when I look back at what was happening and the triggers and the signs and the symptoms in 2016, you kind of think, how did you get to December? Anyway, we closed the deal in August, and rather than taking that moment to look after myself as I had promised to myself, I actually thought, you know what, I'm going to get the first 100 days done, because we all know as leaders the first 100 days of anything is the most important, to really set the new relationship with an investor and new dynamics of a board, and just get everything off to a good start. And so I continued, and I worked back quite recently. It was on day 105, having closed the deal, that I burnt out physically, mentally, pretty violently, in this house, on the stairs. And I was really physically quite unwell by this stage, but I was just utterly exhausted and burnt out, and I knew that I needed help, but mainly I knew that I needed help physically, and I called my doctor, and you can never get an appointment on the day if you call my doctor, and amazingly they said, could you get down here in 15 minutes? We've got an appointment. I truly think the universe was looking out for me that day. And I got to my doctor and then couldn't stop crying. And she gave me some antibiotics for the viral infection that I had at this stage, which was really the reason I'd gone to her. But I didn't quite realise that was my burnout moment. And she said, you need to stop, you need to rest, you need to create space. And I'm so grateful to that GP. She was amazing. And so I did stop, and I started to have some quite interesting conversations with my board, and I had asked the board kind of during this time frame. It's all slightly blurred now, and when I relay a story, it's nothing actually completely worked in this logical order, but it was interesting to me that I had a very, very loving and concerned board, but it was far easier for us all to talk about my fibroid, my really heavy periods, my severe anemia, that was then kind of made me come to the decision that I was going to go ahead with a hysterectomy that was going to draw a line under sort of a decade's worth of health issues that I'd had. It was much easier for us to talk about all of those things, and let me tell you, no one really wants to talk about heavy periods and hysterectomies and impending loss of fertility, than it was to talk about my mental health, which I had also flagged some of my concerns. In fact, it was almost a sigh of relief when I brought up the subject of hysterectomies and fibroids and heavy periods. And we never talked about my mental health explicitly ever again. And I hold myself, I was complicit in that. I found it very difficult to talk about. I was really afraid to say to them, I am concerned for my mental health, but I did say it to them. As I say, we moved on to a more easy to digest and cope with conversation, I think, which was the physical. So I then kind of had this next moment of creating space, starting to kind of look after myself physically. But I had this sort of terrifying moment where I realised that actually I'm not just unwell and exhausted, that my passion and my purpose for Livity had utterly burnt out as well. In fact, I kind of thought, I'm not sure if I can ever walk into that office ever again. And that came as a huge shock to me, because I'd created the perfect business in the world, which I loved and was deeply proud of, and had a plan to lead up for the next 4 years. And I just thought, I can't go there anymore. I'm done. It's totally worn me out. And all of the things that had happened in 2016, it was just 1 too many, 3 too many, 10 too many things. And I then went into a period of utter terror, because I thought, I don't know what I would do. I am Liberty. I was totally defined by being a leader and a co-founder of this business, and an important business, and a business that people admired and respected. And, what on earth was I thinking, that maybe I couldn't go back there or be involved with it anymore. And of course, now I realise I was in the midst of depression, and it's that hollowness and hopelessness that often comes with depression that puts everything else, kind of goes out of context and out of perspective. So anyway, I created some space to rest. And again, the big narrative was Michelle's taken some time off because she's got some physical stuff to sort out. And actually, there was a really difficult moment for me where I look back and there was a conversation that I'm always quite an open and honest person, and I like to take that into my leadership. And I shared some honest things with the business back in the December when I was not going to be around for the Christmas party, and taking a few weeks off. And I was told that's all a bit awkward when you're kind of that honest about things. So let's work out what the line is, and the line literally became a line, and then I disappeared from the business for a few months. And I look back, and that in itself I felt deeply uncomfortable with. And I was then in this space of now not really being in work, but not really having a plan beyond that, and in a period of utter anxiety, and that for me I can only describe as a terror, and like being in a permanent nightmare, or like being in that moment when you jump awake, if you've ever had a nightmare, and you kind of get that that adrenaline, and you're kind of really shaky, and you feel like really, really scared, like someone's just walked in the room or something, but you're just waking up because of its nightmare. I had that 80% of the time. That was just how I felt. And that in itself is exhausting, to be in that kind of terror state. I felt quite paranoid because there wasn't a plan, and there wasn't enough of a conversation happening with the people that I was working with, that I was in a relationship with, in terms of the business and my job. And that was kind of bad enough. But then it flipped into a non-terror state, into actually what was more just like literally a non-state, a state of nothing. And what I know now is that anxiety and depression are often linked. They're often a joint diagnosis. And I was flipping between the kind of the anxiety and the high terror and sort of paranoia. Not a psychosis, but just unhelpful thoughts and chattering mind, and not really being able to see things rationally, just that constant state of terror, dropped into this then deep depression where I didn't care, and there was nothing, and there weren't really many feelings at all. And I spent a lot of time in my pyjamas, and my husband, Remy, who was just so amazing during that time, would encourage me to get out of my pyjamas and take Teddy for a walk down to our local coffee shop. And like that walk and that encouragement, that was all I needed to do. Just let's get out of the pajamas and go for a walk. Kind of saved me. I don't know if that's too dramatic a word. That I wasn't being asked to do any more than that.
Do you want me to look at you?
If you like, yeah. Maybe just look at me. I once learned this trick which was like, okay, can you smile? Don't smile. Smile. And you get a good
Is
smile.
that it?
Yeah.
That's the trick. Oh, did you see that trick, Lil?
Yeah. Come this way. Sorry, that was probably quite a good place to stop as well, because I was like,
What do I need to
what
say
do I
here?
have to say? Slightly took the opportunity.
It's okay.
Where should we go from?
Well, I was just asking you, to maybe perhaps expand a little bit on the conversations that you felt that you needed to have that you weren't having.
So, yeah, I think there were lots of conversations that I needed to have or should have been having around that time in terms of my mental health, what was happening for me, in my head and in my mind. I mean, really simply, there is just a massive stigma around mental health. And in December 2016, I would say I'm a pretty open person and can talk about lots of things, but I was incredibly worried about sharing with some of the people that needed to know that I was struggling with my mental health. And so I did say it, I wrote it, but as soon as we could find a reason not to talk about it, as soon as I replaced it with, oh yeah, and there's this really big major physical thing as well that I'm dealing with, it was just much more comfortable for people. And these are people that I love and respect dearly, in different ways. It's just we're not used to talking about it. What does that mean? You've gone mad? Mental health, yeah, that means you've gone mad, right? So you're a liability. You're a liability to the business. So you're a liability to yourself, to others. What do you mean you're worried for your mental health? What does that actually mean? Well, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't have the words or a diagnosis of anxiety and depression at that moment in time when I shared that. So it's hard to really pinpoint and come up with a specific answer for you on that. It's really, really hard for people to talk about. And I think, when those people in particular, were all responsible for the success of a business.
What about your own family?
I didn't want to worry my mum, because my mum also has anxiety and depression. So I definitely tried to hide it from her at first. I just didn't want her worrying about it. But then spent Christmas and New Year with her and went through all of that kind of masking that we do to put on a brave face, and that in itself is exhausting. There are people living their day-to-day lives in my business, in your business, in every single business, who are masking their struggle with their mental health, and of course that puts their mental health in even more jeopardy. So I did a lot of masking, but at that stage I didn't have a diagnosis, and I think once I had a diagnosis, my diagnosis came in, what I think was a really beautiful and really, really important way because it was the start of my whole what next in life. And as someone who is quite resilient and likes to help themselves, around the January time, I had bought Ruby Wax's book Frazzled, because I was already using mindfulness and meditation and believe in the benefits of that, and was curious to understand it more. And in Ruby's book Frazzled, she goes into the evidence and the science behind mindfulness. And so that was the reason that I bought her book, and I was really enjoying reading it and practicing some of these things. And then it completely took me by surprise when I got to a part in the book where she describes falling back into depression when she's writing this actual book, Frazzled. And I realised I was suddenly reading this description of this thing she was calling depression. I was thinking, but what she's describing is how I feel. But she's calling it depression. I thought what I was feeling was just a bit of a low dip, low energy, a bit tired, a bit worn out. And it was actually that moment, kind of with tears rolling down my face, that got me back to my GP, who I was seeing anyway, because really my GP knew that there was more than the physical stuff happening for me. So she, as I say, I was incredibly lucky, and she was just encouraging me to go and see her every few weeks. But on this next appointment, I said to her, I think I might have depression. You could tell she was a bit like, no shit, Sherlock. Why do you think she got okay, let's look at what we can do. And we looked at medication. She said, look, take this literature away, have a think about it, read about it. You'll have to commit for 6 months if you're going to explore this route. You can, it really could help, but you don't have to. And then we looked at the alternatives, which was NHS talking therapies. And for me in that moment, I think because I have quite a lot of self-awareness, so now I've got a name for something, I've got a label, I sort of at that moment kind of surrendered to the anxiety and the depression. I was like almost with a sigh of relief. I've actually got something. I can give it a name. It's not just me being difficult or weird or pathetic. It's kind of how I felt. I felt quite pathetic. I felt quite a failure.
To be able to call it something, to be able to...
Yeah.
How did that feel, that moment of clarity?
It was a bit of relief, actually. To stop pretending and like surrender to it. Because I think I was still fighting it at that point in lots of different ways. And although I was not in the business, I'd agreed to keep one hand in the business, one foot in the business. So I was going out and I was still meeting people. I wasn't in the office, I wasn't in the business, but I could not let go for all kinds of reasons. And at that moment, I let go and realised that I didn't need to look after myself. So there was probably then kind of a small moment in time. I probably dropped maybe a little bit further into this kind of nothingness of depression. But Remy, my husband, and Lily, my daughter, and Teddy, my dog, it's amazing what your furry friends can bring. He basically drives us mad until we shut him up by giving him a treat. It's MHFA England.
Okay.
So it's Mental Health First Aid.
Okay, great.
Which was mental health first aid is the same as physical health first aid, to preserve life.
So for the sake of this conversation, you have participated in this program now, and you are becoming or have become a mental health first aider.
This is all about, I know it looks like a triangle, but believe me, it's beautiful. So this is an exercise that we do quite early on, which is around the stress container. Sometimes people refer to it as the stress bucket. And it's this notion of, actually, we all have lots of stuff going on in life, and all of that stuff is kind of going into your stress container. And stress is part of living and being a human being, and sometimes is really good and sometimes crucial for kind of spurring us on. And so it all comes into the top, and then we have various coping strategies. So the tap is like our release, and yours might be exercise, and mine might be mindfulness, or talking about it, or just finding different ways to relieve that stress. And then if you think about me and my stress container and what was happening to me in 2016, and I had a lot of physical health issues, had the investment deal, it was the year of, it was either the election or the referendum, the targets, the weird thing that happened on the plane, all of those things, and less using any kind of coping mechanisms to kind of relieve some of that stress. So then what happens if you haven't got any outlets and you've got so much coming in, your stress container overflows.
You mentioned a framework. Could you, I'm sure it's extensive because it took 2 days to go through, but is there any way you could give me an account of some of it?
Yeah, I can give you a speedy account of what happens on a 2-day mental health first aid course. You understand the context of mental health. We understand lots of different types of mental health diagnosis, from anxiety to depression to bipolar to psychosis to schizophrenia, to things like self-harm, which isn't a diagnosis but it's a behaviour that is linked to poor mental health, to eating disorders, and it's very interactive. It takes into account different people's learning styles, and you, as an instructor, I'm a facilitator, and that in business, that's what I'm really good at. I'm a facilitator, so I don't have to have all the answers, but you get these great resources. So the mental health continuum is quite a nice thing to just be aware of. So we used to measure our mental health by no diagnosis or severe diagnosis, but what we also are encouraged to look at now is what your, when you have maximum mental well-being and fitness, and when that's at a low, and then you've got these kind of 4 quadrants. But the point being, it is a continuum. We can all be moving around these, and even if you have a severe diagnosis and really poor mental health and well-being, you can still move up into a place of good well-being, even though you've had a diagnosis, even though you might be living with a diagnosis. Quite early on, we introduce what the kind of the MHFA England methodology is, which is ALGE. The approach being how we approach someone, how we approach, assess and assist with any crisis that may be going on. The L is how we listen and communicate non-judgmentally, which is probably the most useful thing I took out of the whole learning, and just try and take the L into all relationships and all things, not just mental health conversations. It's kind of that whole thing that we have our own frame of reference, and we need to park that sometimes, or draw upon it to have sympathy and empathy. But that being non-judgmental about someone who's talking to you about their own mental health is massively important and massively valuable. So that's the A and the L. The G is give support and information. The first E is encourage professional support. And the final E is encourage other supports. And that's looking at all the other resources that there are in life that might help someone on their journey of recovery. But it's just a very nice kind of approach that you teach people. So they go out into the world with a better understanding of mental health, but also this way to feel confident to have a conversation. And along the way, you learn really valuable, important things. For example, that by asking someone if they're having suicidal thoughts, it won't make them more likely to act on those suicidal thoughts. In fact, it might be the question and the intervention that prevents them from acting upon those suicidal thoughts. I think that's mind-blowing because I would definitely, even just unconsciously, would be afraid to ask someone that question. I think we all have a role to play in this topic because it will affect all of us at some point, if it hasn't already. But it probably has affected most people already, no matter what age they are, if they were watching this. So I think everyone has a role to play. I think we should be teaching our children mental health first aid. I used my mental health first aid skills at the beginning of the year when my daughter disclosed something to me about someone she was worried about, and we used algae as an approach to get that person help, and we got them their help. That's amazing. 300 quid to do that course. Everyone should do mental health first aid. It might not be perfect, there might be refinements that could be made to it, but I just think absolutely brilliant.
Your daughter noticed that perhaps someone needed support, which leads me on to my question of, what are the behaviours or patterns of someone suffering from mental health issues? You mentioned self-harm. I don't know if that is a sign or that is you call it something else.
So self-harm could be a sign. So if it were, so if you were a teacher and it was a young person in school, you might, it might be summer, but you might see someone covering up, wearing long sleeves and kind of covering themselves up to maybe hide evidence. They might, be avoiding the showers because they might not want to, show where they've been cutting or burning or hurting themselves. It might be changes in behaviour. It might be in the workplace. It might be someone coming in later, someone leaving early. But equally, it might be people coming in early and staying later. Presenteeism, so people covering up and being present in the business, but it might be a difference in their performance and their productivity. But let's understand before we put them into a performance review. Sure, maybe be a human being and see is there something else going on for you? We have everyone has lives outside of work.
I saw a video yesterday on LinkedIn which was like Simon Sinek on empathy. Do you see that?
No, I am a big fan of Start With Why.
Yeah, so he said something along the lines of, here's empathy in the work environment. Big executive comes in, says your numbers are down, tells you that he's going to have to cut your budgets and you're going to have to lose some team members or yourself. What it should be is big executive comes in, says to you, hey, your numbers are down. Is everything okay? Is everything all right at home?
Exactly. Sometimes there might be no sign, and there might be no sign because we have a stigma problem, and so people are hiding it often. But it might be that, if someone is contemplating taking their own life, it might be that they start to put their affairs in order, that they start to give their belongings away. Sometimes there are subtle signs, that maybe we can look back and actually, we did see some of the signs. But it's often, maybe they are subtle signs, but we just didn't ask because maybe we were a bit too afraid to ask. We didn't want to embarrass them. So again, it comes back to the stigma and awkwardness, and someone is behaving differently, and it doesn't seem in a massively great way. Maybe just as human beings, we should be asking them, how is everything at the moment? How is your mental health? I've noticed that you're coming in a bit later, or that your work seems a bit different at the moment, or you're a bit quieter, or it's looking out for people, really, isn't it?
So how do you intervene in these moments?
It's the A. So it's working out how best to approach someone, how to have that conversation, when to have that conversation, where to have that conversation. So being mindful of, maybe not having it in the middle of the office or the canteen, just asking someone if they want to go for a cup of tea, really. Somewhere where they can feel comfortable. Lil? What do you want for lunch, Bubs? Do you want to make it? Won't take long, will it? Do you want to do it now? Yeah? Don't assume you know what is going on for that person or what isn't going on for that person. Again, take the L, listen and communicate non-judgmentally. We don't need to tell people what they should be doing, certainly not as a mental health first aider. I think getting the context around mental health first aid, you're not there to give a diagnosis. You're not there to give, clear direction on what should or shouldn't be done. You might want to reference what's worked for you or what you've seen work for others, but be really mindful of that. Everyone's different. Be really mindful of, oh yeah, I really understand. Hear people, hear what they're saying, hear what they're sharing with you, but just maybe be mindful of not kind of jumping right in with agreeing, colluding, endorsing. Just, let them share with you, and acknowledge if someone's in distress. Acknowledge their distress. But again, if for example it was a psychotic episode, never collude.
Having.
Sorry, Dan.
I think it's really interesting the fact that you have experienced a vulnerability and now you are learning to help others who are experiencing that themselves. Being able to have been in both camps, what are you most aware of in terms of these two experiences you've had? What is a really important takeaway?
Having been sort of firmly on both sides of trying to help others, but also receive help myself. I think one of the most important takeaways is the patience bit, because sometimes you really, really want to help someone, but you just have to go at their pace, their speed, and that might not be quite as fast as you want to go or think that they should go. But sometimes, even at that moment where I had a diagnosis and was kind of surrendering to it all, I could have started with some clinical psychology back in the February, March, but I wasn't ready to do that until November. I had to be patient with myself mostly on that one, but other people around me might have been really, really keen for me to do that, get on with that. And of course, if you push people quicker than they're ready to, that can be massively unhelpful and might keep them kind of back for longer than maybe if you'd given them a bit more space and they'd come to that conclusion and got that help themselves. There is a kind of asterisk that you have to put around that. Sometimes people might be incredibly unwell and poorly and need that intervention. Everyone is so different. Their experience of poor mental health is probably so different, and the things that help them through into recovery can be so different as well. So for me, I'm coming at it from what's been important for me: time and space, and going slower, and being able to talk to someone about it, to give it names, to understand it better, to now totally immerse myself in the whole topic, so that I can own it rather than it own me. But for someone else who might have anxiety and depression and burnout, it could be a completely different recovery plan because they're a different person. Isn't that the extraordinary thing about minds and mental health? Is, it's not having a headache or, some kind of physical illness where actually this is how we treat it. The treatment for mental health is kind of got to be much more holistic and broad and thoughtful and tailored. And that's I guess also why we, it feels more complex. But our brains are really complex, so no wonder.
I think that's a really nice thought. I'm really picking up on this absolute non-judgmental take you must have as a first aider.
Yeah, really important. But you can take that into life. We do. We're all so judgmental, aren't we? We can't help it because it's actually, we're built in to make those judgments. It's fight, fear and fight, flight and fear and all of that kind of stuff, isn't it? It's because we're assessing, is this person safe? Is this person danger? What signals are they giving me? And sometimes you have to remove all of those to get to that deeper place of openness and honesty and trust, I guess. But I think that's probably when more exciting connections happen in life.